there was a company like Peloton who was like, we're spending a lot of money in advertising and our conversion rate on our website is really low. And you say, well, why do you think the conversion rate on your website's really low? Well, the number one reason is price. And people don't have the cash to pay for the full thing up front. And they don't want to be sitting on a credit card bill that they can't pay off with a 28% APR. And it's like, oh, well, if I could do a firm and make it so you have a 0% APR loan, what would that be worth to you? If you look at it, you could end up figuring out that a certain percentage of people, if a firm or the buy now, pay later solution was on the website, would end up buying. That much more revenue would be generated, which would be worth this much more to Peloton. And now all of a sudden, you can figure out how you want to price your product.
How different would it be if the same thing started looking now like it wouldn't change if nothing else really did? Subscribe and hit this like button and share this with a friend. Hey, this is Journey with Christian D. Evans podcast. This is Christian D. Evans coming at you. I thank you so much for listening to this. We interview top level 8 and 9 figure entrepreneurs, business owners, and CEOs that have either had an exit or they are actually running and scaling their business to that $1 billion valuation. We've also interviewed top level TEDx speakers as well as incredible psychologists, also a lot of wealth managers that manage $1 billion to $200 billion and more. We've had incredible guests like Sachin Kajarian, Cameron Herold, Jay Abraham, and so many others. So if you find this of value, then share this with a friend. And we really appreciate it. Guys, show our guests some love by liking this and subscribing. And guys, until next time, remember, be uncommon if you can, and enjoy the episode. Cheers. Thank you so much for tuning into Journey with Christian D. Evans podcast. I'm your host, Christian D. Evans. This guy has been on Forbes, and they featured him on the 30 under 30 in venture capital. He's also been featured in Venture Capital Journal, named him one of the venture capitalists 40 rising stars. He is the general partner at Primary VC, where he leads new consumer investment, including consumer healthcare, FinTech, PropTech, marketplaces. Now, he also was a founder of a direct-to-consumer footwear company, and I am so excited about having him on. Please welcome the general partner of Primary VC, my friend, Jason Shuman. How you doing today, Jason?
Doing good, man. Thanks for having me, Christian.
Well, man, I'm excited about diving into kind of your background because, like I mentioned, you've been featured in numerous places at a very young, but also being able to really make leaps and bounds in the VC world. But before we dive into it, I want to ask, because Primary VC, you guys have your guys' thesis is very interesting. You guys you have numerous verticals, but one of the things that make you stand out above the crowd is that your incubator. You guys are able to take a company, really, take them from basically nothing to really establishing something incredible because of that really just intense incubator that you have established. So Jason, I'm curious, when you're looking at your process at Primary compared to all the other VCs out there, what would you say makes you guys stand out regarding the incubator process? Why is that you guys have this dialed in so well?
Yeah, so I think at the end of the day, Christian, like what differentiates Primary from really any other VC firm, in my opinion, and especially when you get inside the four walls, you start to notice it, and especially when we get on your cap table, you get to notice it, is the fact that we're builders, not backers. And that is an important distinction at the end of the day, because backers basically use their network as currency. And we certainly, leverage our network and make plenty of introductions for our portfolio companies. But as builders, not backers, we also do the work. And doing the work is like core to who we all are as people and investors and operators. And so really when it comes to Primary, I would say there's two pieces to it that make us special. One is the portfolio impact team, which is 30 people strong. It's run by my partners, Cassie Young and Rebecca Price. They go in and they work with the companies on everything from recruiting to go-to-market support and strategic finance. And that's certainly, one of the things that differentiates us, because we're actually doing things for the companies. But on the, startup studio side of things, we have something called Primary Labs that my partner, Brian Schechter, runs. And, I think candidly, it's just like, the fact is, like, VCs really aren't smarter than anybody else. They just see a lot of stuff. And, we've seen, and we do continue to see, thousands of deals a year across multiple different industries and business models. And oftentimes it's our job to connect dots. And so we're able to connect dots from, one industry and one business model that worked in that industry And then we might be able to find other industries that, resemble like that other industry where the business was successful, and start a business with that business model in that industry. And, I think when it comes to the incubation model that we have over at Primary Labs, there's plenty of great founders out there that are unbelievable operators today, sitting inside of companies that don't have the time to come up with great ideas. And so if you can give them the security blanket and give them an idea and let them make it their own, and you can give them a check that's the day they walk out the door to start that company, it'll just increase their level of conviction to leave their job and get it started. And I think as a result, Primary's done incredibly well. And, we have a couple of companies, our first two, that are worth well over $1 billion combined. And, we're continuing to rock now with about 4+ companies being spun out every year.
So what I find so interesting about this is, and this is one of the reasons why I wanted to have you on, is the incubation really shows to me that because of your verticals, you guys are in FinTech, you guys are PropTech, and each one of those theses are slightly different, right? A different go-to-market strategy, different kind of KPIs, et cetera, right? And so though you guys are able to, regardless, put them in this incubation and then obviously create a successful company. And I'm curious, when you're looking at this, Jason, not just at the front end stage, like, hey, what this deal looks like, where are we going to put our time and energy into it, right? Acquiring and having that conversation, but really throughout that process, are there tiered out? Are there certain stages that, hey, because you've done this 100 different times, that you should be aware of, and talking to that founder and say, hey, when we get to maybe, a certain income level, or when we get to a certain, employee size, this is when we start looking at XYZ, and then we start integrating, building that culture or the team, or more of like business development, or more of sales structures, et cetera, et cetera. I'm just curious. I would imagine there would be probably certain stages that these, or pillars that you guys look at and say, okay, hey, are we getting to that next level? These are some red flags that we should be aware of when we're growing and scaling these companies.
Yeah, I think it's important to kind of like dumb down, like, really, what is a startup at the end of the day? Like a startup at the end of the day is like an overarching hypothesis that a founder has around like the world, and that if they create this product, that there will be value created in the world and people will want to pay for the product or service. And that if they pay for the product or service, that the cash flows at the end of the day resulting in that business being able to execute will end up being relatively high. And so, when it comes to starting a business, the way that we look at it is you have your overarching hypothesis, and then you have a variety of sub hypotheses. And when you start putting down those sub hypotheses, like, can I get, these types of people to buy the product? And can I get them to buy the product by, via phone or via email, or, does it have to be an in-person sale? And can I get them to pay more than $20,000 or $30,000 or $100,000 for the product? Like, it's figuring out like what are those, sub hypotheses along the way. And as you start to prove those out, you then unlock more capital and the right to unlock more sub hypotheses that you have to building a multi-billion-dollar company, ideally. And I think it's important to state, I think one thing that I feel very lucky, and I think the team at Primary feels very lucky about, is like our success is certainly compounded on top of itself. We have 2 top 5% global funds. Our first couple of incubations are quite successful. Now, the quality of talent that comes in the door to, start these companies and be the founders of these companies inside of Primary Labs is really like next level. And they are, taking a pre-seed round from us over at Primary because we're able to be great partners with them. But it also enables them to go raise seed rounds that are much larger on average, with potentially, less proven out from a revenue perspective. And so, our average seed round for an incubation right now is north of $5 million and north of a $20 million valuation. That's even in this bear market. And part of that's because of, the people we've been able to recruit. And part of it's because people really believe in the process that we've done to validate the hypotheses that we're going out to run after.
This is so interesting. I appreciate kind of sharing that a little bit. So when you're looking at, kind of the relationship with your portfolio companies, and they're going through this incubation process, right? And I know you guys have a very well-established team that help them and obviously coordinate and collaborate and have those synergistic relationships. I'm curious though, is there a certain when you're looking at acquiring a company, or I shouldn't say acquire a company, but when you're looking to write a check and obviously have that synergistic relationship, do you think 4, 5, 7 years down the road and say, okay, hey, how are we going to exit? And is there a strategic plan for it? And that's what I always find so interesting with VCs is a lot of times they do have a very strategic plan and say, hey, we're looking 5, 7 years. This is our go-to market. This is what we're going to do when everything goes rocks and roll. And then this is who we're going to exit or get acquired to or IPO. I'm curious, is that kind of the same structure you guys have?
We're not thinking about like who is the business going to exit to. We're thinking about what does this business look like from a financial profile perspective in 7 to 10 years. And we need to be able to believe that the business can generate significant cash flow at the end of the day. That's it, because you're seeing it right now. Look, the market's correcting itself. Like, turns out that growth isn't free and capital is not free. And you can't just scale a business with 0% gross margins and expect that the public markets are going to like you. So we need to find businesses that can be either ideally capital efficient and have very sticky recurring revenue relationships with their customer base that can eventually be profitable, and not only a little bit, but very profitable one day. If that happens, by the way, the rest of what you just brought up will work itself out. I don't worry about that.
That makes sense. And so I would imagine because I've heard the VC kind of metrics a little bit, where you anticipate about a third that are unicorns that explode, a third that are medium, kind of results, and the third that just, aren't able to perform. Is there a timeline? And I know it's very contextual depending upon obviously each company and what stages, but I would imagine there are certain timelines that you guys want to hit or certain metrics you guys are looking for. Like, okay, hey, you know what? We raise X amount of dollars. You guys are pre-rev. Cool, wonderful. All right, we have, 6, 8, 12 months. We want to get you 3, 4, $5 million top line. Like, is there certain things that you should be aware? Like, okay, otherwise you kind of have to reassess that relationship. And then because you have numerous other deals, numerous other companies you guys are working through this incubation, and you guys like, okay, well, we're spending 80% of our time here and making sure you're not diluting your time and energy towards something that's not producing, et cetera. So I'm just curious how you guys contextually look at that.
Yeah, so I think at the end of the day, the way to think about it is when I'm giving a company capital at the seed round, we're typically thinking about that company having runway for 18 to 24 months, preferably more than 24 months, but like 18 to 24 is like a good mental model around that. That means that, the company needs to go out and raise 6 months, at least 6 months before their cash out. And the way that we think about it is, if I invest in you at a $15 million valuation, I would like to get a 3x markup in the next round. And so whatever metrics it takes for the next round investor to want to invest at a 3x markup are the metrics that we want you to be achieving. Now, oftentimes for SaaS companies, that means somewhere between $1 to $2 million of ARR, annual recurring revenue, and a clear path to tripling that at least in the next year. That way you're trading off a multiple of next 12 months revenue. Consumer companies, if it's a subscription company or recurring revenue company, some people would talk about, $1 to $2 million as well. I actually think it's probably looking more like in the $5 to $10 million ARR type range. But the more important thing, I think, underlying all of that isn't the total number, as much as it is about the first part of the business is about finding product market fit. And if a great founder can find product market fit, it will take it a very, very long way, and the velocity and the growth will come. But finding product market fit, that is by far the hardest part of a startup.
And so what does that process look like for you guys in regards to kind of making sure that, because I know, again, it's very contextual, but I would love to see, of course, like, hey, you know what, when you guys are planning that out and, implementing that process, you want to say, hey, you know what, we're looking at, okay, what's that strategy? What's that tactic to ensure that we obviously have, a good product? Is a lot of data analytics, or is it more of just kind of, hey, you know what, we've done this numerous times. We kind of know what works. We know how to kind of position it, et cetera.
Well, I think you need to bet on founders that are incredibly resourceful. They move fast and they're very smart. And if you're very smart and you move fast, you're going to learn from every iteration on the product and every iteration on like the go-to-market side and how you're trying to distribute and acquire customers. And eventually, if you've iterated enough times because you're moving really, really quickly, it's like kind of like a whole, like I'm sure you know the saying, it's like you have enough shots on goal, eventually you're gonna like make one. It's very similar with product market fit. So I do think that the best founders are moving quickly, they're iterating, they're listening to their customers, and they're making changes, and eventually they figure it out. And one perfect example of that is a company called Dandy, which originally started out as a business called Orthly. It was a business that was a competitor to Smile Direct Club, but instead of being its own brand, they used to send people to local dentist offices. And when they sent the people to the local dental office to get their aligner treatment, we acquired those customers for the local dentist. We that business was not a business that ended up working in its original form, but the co-founders Tony and Daniel looked at the data of these intraoral scanners that we were giving to the dentist. So I'm sure you remember, like when you would go to the dentist, you'd like bite on those putty molds. Today you don't necessarily need to do that because they have these intraoral scanners. However, intraoral scanners are incredibly expensive. They're like $30,000. While with Dandy, they saw that when we were giving away these intraoral scanners to the dentist, that the dentists were ordering other labs and other like dental supplies using the scanners that we gave them. And so we were like, wonder if there's a business there. And so, we went down and we did like research for 30 days on the dental lab market, which turns out to be the industry that makes those supplies. And, the business pivoted a few years ago into a business that gives away those scanners. They build their own software on top of it. And then we handle all the manufacturing with our, in-house and within our, network of manufacturers across the nation. And now that business has grown from, call it zero a few years ago to now north of like 700 people.
Incredible. And let me ask you this, because I do understand when you're working with a go-to-market fit, right? Product fit, you also want to get talent acquisition, right? And that's one of the biggest things you want to ensure in order to scale and anticipate that growth long term. So I'm curious, with your guys' network and your incubation process, I would imagine it's not only just that product fit, but also that talent acquisition to ensure that there's a nice, smooth transaction. And how do you ensure that there is? What does that look like? Again, is it more of like, okay, hey, you know what, we got the founders and the founders are communicating with you, because maybe some of these founders maybe have had an exit, they know what they should be aware of, and some of you guys are obviously have a very very active approach to your portfolio company. So what does that look like?
Yeah, so I do think that it's important to state that I'd rather you wait to hire, and try to scale before you like basically waiting is more advantageous than being too early. And the reason I say that is because finding product market fit's really hard. And usually it's the founders that need to find the product market fit with a very, very small, very, very scrappy team of generalists. And then after you find product market fit, you want to start to hire specialists. But if I go and hire you as a salesperson to sell a product, you probably are coming over from some other company where you got some good training done and you knew how to sell the thing the way that you were told to sell the thing, and you got really, really good at that, but you never had to figure out like what that playbook was. So if I bring you in and I'm like, here, go figure it out, we don't really know if it's going to land, and you start to try to sell, like your morale is going to go down because you're going to not have an easy time selling, and you're going to be like, wow, am I bad at my job now, or is this product not good? And like turns out, no, the product isn't good yet. So once the product is good, then you're ready to scale. Then that's when Rebecca Price and her team, Gina Yoakum over on that side, as well as the number of the great recruiters, Ryan, Kat, Gianna, like you name it, like that whole team, Steven, like they go in and they can literally like build out lists of people for you that fit a profile that we believe will be the most successful within your company. We'll help you put together job packets, and that outlines like, what does the process look like? What's the job description? What are the different interview stages? Who is the interviewer in that stage? What questions are they asking? Why are they asking those questions? What are they trying to pull out of that interview? And like, what are they grading for? That way there's no like, you're not getting asked the same questions in every single interview along the way. That's just kind of silly and a waste of time. And they're helping design case studies. And I think that, that team makes sure that not only are you getting butts in seats faster when you actually need them, but they're coming at a much higher success rate as well.
Interesting. That makes perfect sense the way you kind of contextually look at that. I do know you guys, and I've heard this where I was talking to another VC, and they focus on more of like when they're acquiring, looking at, writing a check for a company or taking that position. A lot of times they're looking for and definitely if it's pre-rev as well as like, pre-concept, like there's no proof of concept established yet. A lot of times it's like they're trying to find the data or finding that idea that is really solves that problem, a massive pain in the marketplace. And I would imagine primary is very similar in that retrospect into that when you're looking at it deal flow wise. But I'm curious, what all does that go into? How do you guys look at that to ensure, okay, hey, there's this massive pain there, it can solve this, and then it helps facilitate more of a better, like, okay, yes, we are going to, raise capital for them, but also when you get to that proof of concept stage and go to market strategy, then you already know, like the data is already there. So again, a lot of this has to come on the pre-front when you're looking and writing a check. So I'd like to get your response on that, Jason.
So I think like I think maybe what you're trying to ask a little bit is like, how do we validate whether or not we think a company will have product market fit? Is that a different way to like maybe frame it up?
Well, it's really I think it's a lot of times when people are looking, and definitely in the VC world, they're
Yeah.
looking for a company that solves a massive pain, because
Yep.
then that ensures when they're solving whatever industry that is, whatever vertical that is, because then that ensures that, hey, you know what? The likeliness of this company is going to succeed just
Yeah.
because it's solving a massive problem, massive pain.
So how do I
And now
figure out
again,
is it a massive problem? Is that the
yes, correct. Like with data,
yeah.
when there is no proof of concept established, I
Yep.
think that's what I find so interesting in the VC world, and that's why I just want to get your guys' response on that.
Yeah, so I'll put it incredibly simply, which is like we have, 2 ears, one mouth. If we listen, in the proportion and that ratio, like, versus speaking, especially when talking to customers, we will hear from them what is the actual pain point and how severe is it. And, people are busy in their day-to-day lives. And if you get in touch with the right users or who should be the right users of a product, or who should be the right buyers of a product, and you ask them about their day to day, and you ask them about their pain points, and you listen about what's causing them a headache, you're going to be able to figure out, oh wow, like this company is onto something. And then you start asking them about budget, like what do you have budgeted for these types of solutions internally, or you ask them about what would this end up replacing for you, and what are you paying for that thing. And once you ask those questions, you start hearing like, how much are people willing to pay for this thing? Or what's the ROI of it? So an example would be like, I'll use an example of like a firm, and all these buy now, pay laters that came. Like at some point in time, there was a company like Peloton who was like, we're spending a lot of money in advertising, and our conversion rate on our website is really low. And you say, well, why do you think the conversion rate on your website's really low? Well, the number one reason is price. And people don't have the cash to pay for the full thing up front. And they don't want to be sitting on a credit card bill that they can't pay off with a 28% APR. And it's like, oh, well, if I could do a firm and make it so you have a 0% APR loan, what would that be worth to you? If you look at it, you could end up figuring out that a certain percentage of people, if a firm or the buy now, pay later solution was on the website, would end up buying. That much more revenue would be generated, which would be worth this much more to Peloton. And now all of a sudden, you can figure out how you want to price your product.
That's so interesting, and I appreciate you explaining that, because I do know you guys are in like big in the fintech and the PropTech world. And again, seeing this industry and understanding this, familiarizing yourself, and also the healthcare side of things, but also seeing how that can obviously increase that conversion or that technology or whatever it is. So I find this so interesting. And let me ask you this, because with healthcare, I always find this so interesting with this kind of this market, right? When you're looking at the healthcare world, there's a lot that obviously need, maybe FDA approved, or, kind of a lot of, R&D that's established to ensure that, but do you, in the healthcare world, specifically with primary, do you guys mainly focus on the tech side of things and how that can obviously revolutionize that industry?
Yeah, we try to stay away from the FDA, man. They're a scary bunch, and it's a long process that's very unpredictable and can be very capital intensive. So I think like trying to stay away from those types of businesses is important for us, and honestly just isn't our skill set. There's plenty of great investors out there that understand the FDA process much better than us. But in the healthcare world, my partner Sam Toole and our colleague Marissa, they lead our healthcare investing practice now. I've made a few healthcare investments over the course of my career. So is my partner Brad. And we just look at the healthcare world, and it's like, think about the amount of spend in the United States on healthcare, and think about everyone's experience with our healthcare system. It's pretty crappy, and then you think about like so many of the ways that we go about healthcare today, and it's still like, it feels as if it was like started like 30-40 years ago. And so we're certainly investing around every part of the healthcare stack, whether it be payments, value-based care, telemedicine, you name it. Like, we're definitely trying to put money to work in that world.
Can you share maybe a case study or story? I know it's probably some of the things you're not able to share, but maybe a case study or a story that you guys look at that, it's the serendipities, right? Because you guys took and you invested with your guys's, LP and GP base, be able to invest into this company. You have seen, and specifically the healthcare, maybe the serendipitous moment of like, wow, we've been able to impact so many people because they were able to get XYZ, or because we were able to go to market strategy. I think this is why I love about entrepreneurship is in the capital markets. This can be, and I think we talked about this offline, like climate, for example. There are certain technologies that not only is it going to be an impact in a positive way for the world, but also it's, structurally very business sound. It's going to be profitable as well, which is, of course, what investors enjoy doing. So I want to just get your response. Jason, you've been in the markets for many, many years, seen a lot of these companies grow. I would imagine there would be serendipitous moments in some circumstances.
Yeah, I think so. I'm an investor in a company called Perry Health. The business does remote patient monitoring for seniors with diabetes. And so what we do is, we send out a blood glucose monitor that is, or glucometer that's hooked up to cell towers, and it sends, readings to our care team of doctors and nurses and health coaches, and it helps people, not only maintain their health when they have diabetes, but more specifically, it helps them actually get a lot better, and it helps them lower their A1C. And I think it's important to bring up because, we live in a world right now in the United States where 80% of the country lacks adequate access to healthcare, according to GoodRx. Okay. That's a big, big number, right? And so you ask me, like, how do I think about like measuring impact? Well, Perry Health is a telemedicine solution. And it's a telemedicine solution because we have a shortage of endocrinologists in the United States, which are people that help care for those people with diabetes. And it takes people far too long to even be able to get to a doctor. And so if you don't have access to a doctor, they can't get an appointment with a doctor, they can't get good quality care. They're already on like the wrong side of history, unfortunately. And so every single patient that Perry Health can acquire and Perry Health can help get better, get healthier, like that makes us feel great because we know that they're doing something that without us, like they'd probably be in trouble. And you look at the life expectancy of the United States right now, and it's it's going down. It's not going in the right direction. And I think it's companies like Perry Health that are going to help it go back up.
And what I find so interesting is you're able to come in with your experience and expertise, where like seeing all that happening and be able to actually help them facilitate go to market, and obviously, like you mentioned, that impact. And it's just incredible. That's what I love about the capital markets. When you're looking at mitigating loss, right? So let's say, for example, and I mean, let's just shoot straight. There are certain companies that it's just struggles. They're not able to get over that hurdle for whatever reason. Maybe it might be the founder, might be just the product, etc. I'm curious, at Primary, are there certain things that you do to say, okay, hey, these are red flags. This is where we start kind of reallocating our time, energy, resources, effort toward other things that are producing a better result. And I just want to get your perspective on that, because again, we understand, that kind of 33%, in kind of three increments a little bit, what that looks like.
So we have an approach that's probably different from most firms, which is, we've started companies before, like we know how hard these things are. These founders are giving their blood, sweat, and tears. And like at the end of the day, I'll say a couple things. One, it's like a never leave a man behind, like mentality. Like, we're not leaving you out on the battlefield solo. Like, I don't care if you're not doing well. Now, if you're not doing well and you're not taking any feedback whatsoever and you're shooting yourself in the foot, it becomes a harder conversation. Don't get me wrong. But for the most part, like, the founders that we're working with, more often than not, it's like the founder's been doing as good of a job as they can do. And we were both just wrong about the hypothesis. And the core hypothesis was off. And so, we're going to work closely with those founders and try to help them out. And then if they need to wind down the business, or honestly, a lot of times founders are going to grind this thing out to the end. Sometimes, like, you need to have the conversation with the founder and be like, look, like, life's short, man. Like, you have another, one or two companies left in the tank here. Like, every day counts. Like, is this really something that you want to be doing? Because for us, to your point, we have a portfolio. I can go to sleep at night knowing that I got another 9 chips on the table. And I think that, for them, they have all of their eggs in that one basket. And sometimes, it's just better for them to shut it down and to move on to the next thing. And it can be another company that we end up backing. And, there's been a few occasions where that's happened, by the way, where, like, had that conversation with the founder in the middle of the pandemic, where, like, they had a travel company. I, was like, I told him, like, it's okay if you want to shut it down. Like, we're not going to think any less of you. I mean, look, we're in a global pandemic. Like, who the heck's getting on a plane right now? And, a few months later, after they ended up shutting it down, the founder came to another idea. We ended up backing him. And then, actually fast forward, what's crazy is during this, interest rate hike, it kind of ruined his whole business model and the new business. And so we had a similar conversation. I said, what do you guys want to do? Do you want to pivot the business? They had a lot of cash on the balance sheet. I go, if you want, we'll work with you. If you want to come in every week, we'll work with you and help you figure out what you want to pivot into, and we'll help you validate ideas. And, the company pivoted a few weeks ago and is almost doing $1 million of revenue now in the last, few weeks. So I think it's important to stick with your companies, because that's where reputations are made, man.
And I highly respect that. Highly respect that. I've asked that question to a few offline, and it's just interesting to get the response. And because that when the numbers are the numbers, and it's like, well, it's hard to spend, your time, energy, and effort and resources towards something that's not producing, and definitely if it's not effective. And so I love your guys' approach in regards to, hey, you know what, no left man, no one left behind in regards.
I,
Um,
wait,
Go ahead.
I have one hot take on this though, because I've heard so many investors mention that, like, they they can't waste their time with their bad companies. They need to spend their time with their good companies and da da da. Well, the fact of the matter is, like, most investors barely spend any time with their good companies. Like 90% of investors barely spend any time. They show up to the freaking board meetings and they, like, read the board deck ahead of time and they make a couple of comments, some of which are smart and some of which aren't. And, like, that's it. And so, like, I think, like, the people that are saying that, like, they're just fooling themselves and, like, giving themselves a level of self-importance that I think is a bunch of BS.
Well, and I appreciate you just kind of calling them out a little bit, because that's kind of what I've noticed a little bit as well. That you just kind of write a check and they're very passive. And you guys, that's why I really wanted to emphasize the incubator process, because you guys have a very hands-on approach with that. I know mental health is very big for a lot of founders, like you mentioned, and the mindset as well. And I am curious at Primary, you guys not only help build the infrastructure, the systems, the processes, the resources, the network, and be able to harness that, but also I'm just curious in regards to making sure that that founder and that those teams are in the mental stability to ensure that, hey, when there's growth, and like you mentioned, they pour their sweat and tears, everything they've got into it. And so I just love to get your response on, like, making sure, like, hey, is there alignment? Are you helping them as well in regards to, like, their mental health, making sure that they do have things aligned at home, aligned, in life, whatever it is? Because I've heard some people that they all of a sudden is that anxiety, panic attack, and there's stories out there, and they are able to produce incredible stuff, but to what cause?
Yeah. A few things. One, my mom's a therapist, my dad's an entrepreneur. So, like, mental health is definitely something that's, like, near and dear to my heart personally. And it's something that I think we all are passionate about at Primary. We were early investors in Alma, which is a company in the mental health space. But so what I would tell you is we think about it in a couple of ways. One, on the, third party resource side of things, we're working with the founders making recommendations and introductions to, folks like executive coaches, where like we're not gonna make therapist recommendations for them. I don't necessarily think that's our place. But in terms of a person that they can talk to about a variety of things when they feel alone, I think that's one of the things. The other thing is, though, like I at least I'll speak for myself, like as a board member and as an investor in your company, if I'm only working with 3 to 4 new companies a year, and I make it my job where like I want to be your first call. I want to be your first call, where I know I'm not going to ever be the best person when it comes to financial modeling a late stage company that's going to go public. Like that's not me. But to have a call about, some of the challenging things that are going on in your life, and like me being able to listen, like I think it's an important thing. And so one thing that I try to do is get dinner with the founders, every other month or so, just to really like hear how they're doing and hear them out. And oftentimes, by the way, like the founders that we work with, like are texting me on a weekly basis. They're texting multiple of my other colleagues as well on a weekly basis. And it's like, I'm getting to hear some of the stuff for sure. And I do think mental health is a really, really important thing at the end of the day. And I want to make sure that they're all taken care of.
I appreciate that. Yeah, because I see so many, and they're willing to do everything possible to build that. And then also having that conversation as well, making sure that they are aligned with that. Because I was talking to someone literally just at this conference, and he was sitting there and he's like, "Man, I invested into this company," and the founder, a few months later, got a divorce, lost his kids. I mean, all that stuff mentally, and that just destroyed him. And obviously, he had still a good, amazing concept, amazing business, and lost it all. But again, it's just a good conversation to have for those individuals. So I appreciate you sharing. I wanted to get back to a little bit of business structure. Okay, so what I'm always intrigued with is there are certain margins that you're looking for, definitely in the fintech world, right? I invest in more of the SaaS world, so the kind of the margins are a little nicer and so forth in certain KPIs. Now, when you're looking at growing, I understand that obviously that's going to eat up the margins a little bit, because obviously you have to build more infrastructure, you build more teams, etc. Is there a healthy margin that you consistently like to look for when you're working with these companies, and when you are? And I'm talking about, obviously maybe they're Series B, Series C down the road, right? Where they've got, top line 8 figures, etc., and beyond. What does that look like? Is there a certain margin that you kind of guys aim for holistically as you guys really start, making that up to the right trajectory?
Yeah, I think at the end of the day, when you think about it, like businesses that have gross margins that are under 50% are incredibly hard to scale. Like incredibly hard to scale, because, every dollar of revenue, you're just getting less and less that's coming straight into the company. And then, it depends on like how operationally complex the businesses are, but you do need to find businesses that have gross margins that are as high as possible. And so there's a reason why, software gross margins are great. Now, we could get into a whole other conversation about whether or not R&D should probably be included a little bit into the gross margin calculation. That's for another day, but like because I do think that there's a little bit of BS in there as well. Because there's like a cost to maintain. But I think you need to find businesses that have healthy gross margins, and that hypothetically, even if like you're in the 50s, you want to make sure that your G&A, in order to run a business that has, gross margins in the 50s, is not incredibly high as a percentage of revenue. And that all depends on the type of business and the business model and the complexities and the nuances of it all.
Okay, and so I mean that makes perfect sense. And so because I've seen some companies where they're like negative EBITDA, right? And they're just EBITDA positive or whatever. And they're, running at 8, 9 figures. And I find that so interesting. Now, some I've talked to where they're, top line 9 million and they're, 3 million EBITDA because of the margins. And I found that very interesting as well. And so I always find it so interesting structurally, do you guys try to really hit that gross margin? Really, that's like kind of your main point, because obviously on the exit, the valuation is a lot better. Or do you guys try to really just max out the debt, and as well as kind of really just shoving everything back into it to ensure that and how do you guys look at the business itself?
It depends on the industry, right? So I think what you're talking about more, by the way, has a lot to do with like burn and like the growth and how we're always modeling things out over the course of time. So for instance, there are plenty of businesses that run at negative gross margins or negative contribution margins in the early days. Now, let's just like throw out an example, right? So if you look at a business like a GoPuff or a DoorDash or any of these companies that rely heavily on, a couple of core variables. Those core variables are average order value, or average cart, essentially, like what are people ordering, how much, like dollar wise. And then the second is DPH, which is deliveries per hour, right? So in the early days of a DoorDash or a GoPuff, you likely are going to have a lower average order value as people are like starting to figure out, like, what the product and services, do they really like the product? Is it a good experience? So on and so forth. And the deliveries per hour, because the business isn't at scale yet, meaning it doesn't have a lot of customers, is going to be lower. Now, if I am paying you, a delivery driver, $20 an hour, and you are delivering one order an hour because I am small and I am only generating $5 of revenue off that one order, I'm clearly going to be losing money on that, right? Like we don't even need to talk about OpEx and overhead and all the other stuff. Like I'm just losing money on the pure like one-to-one thing. However, when the company grows and scales over time, and now DoorDash, adds a ton more restaurants, right, in one area, and they start adding more expensive restaurants, and GoPuff starts adding more products to it and more SKUs. And then instead of having, one customer in a neighborhood order, they have 25, in an hour order. Now, all of a sudden, maybe you're making 6 deliveries or 7 deliveries in an hour, and you're making 10 or 15 or $20 off of every order. And so now all of a sudden the unit economics flip to profitable. And so I think that's important because there's a lot of businesses, a lot of consumer businesses, a lot of, logistics heavy businesses, a lot of manufacturing heavy businesses, a lot of healthcare services businesses, by the way, that start out with negative gross margins and flip over as utilization improves with scale.
So is there a timeline, right? Because like you just mentioned, I appreciate you kind of explain that in a very beautiful, well-established way. But is there a timeline that you look for? It's like, okay, hey, top line, this is what we're looking forward to, and ensure that we do get, profitable. Or
Yeah.
is it, because I know some of these individuals, they're burning, and they're valued at $1 billion, et cetera, and they're still burning through. And so I just find it
Yeah.
so interesting. I don't know if there's a specific timeline that you guys like to say, okay, hey, otherwise we'll have to kind of restructure this or somehow, streamline this.
Post Series A, I want to see profitable unit economics for sure. Now, today, before this whole downturn, you probably could have got away with it through like the Series C, Series D, as long as, I'll caveat it by saying, it was obvious to everyone in the room what it would take to get profitable on a unit economics basis. Now, when to get profitable on a company basis, I think that like you have to start having that conversation, post Series A, post Series B for most companies, just because we don't know where the heck we are right now. And like everybody's, like looking around like, oh my gosh, where's the next round going to come from? But I do think that, especially the later stage guys, the growth stage guys, they better get profitable because boy, it's a bloodbath out there and there's not a lot of money to go around.
Okay, and so the economy or the foundation is changing and the trajectory of that. And like you just mentioned, they should be getting profitable. And so like that, what I was seeing maybe just a year and a half ago, that's not common, and it should be common is basically what you're saying, because they're anticipating more revenue, or excuse me, more being able to raise more capital to flood it and infuse it back into the company to ensure that you're able to withstand that trajectory. Because if you're negative, you're just burning through just an incredible amount of cash, hoping that of course at some point you're going to be profitable down in the future. So correct me if I'm wrong, that's kind of what you're saying. Now these
Yeah.
companies are at that late stage, they should be in a situation where it's like, okay, hey, we gotta turn profitable.
You need to control your own destiny now. That's the problem. Like it's like, especially if you raised a round at the peak of the market, let's like if you raised a round at $1 billion, right? $1 billion valuation at the peak of the market. And let's say, based on public market comps today, even if your company was fairly priced, which by the way, nothing was fairly priced back then, but let's say it was fairly priced. That means with the way that the market's dropped, your company is now worth half. That means your company is worth 500 million. So in order to even grow back into the old valuation that you had, you need to grow over 2x. Like that's a lot, and so I think like there's a lot of people out there that need to give themselves enough time to get up to that minimum of 2x in order to live up to the valuation.
This is an incredible conversation, man. And I appreciate you just sharing your insight on this. I mean, coming from just your thesis in regards to incubator and what you guys look at, obviously no man left behind concept as well. And, obviously you guys have seen incredible growth and trajectory, as well as just understanding the founders and not only just the business infrastructure and the talent acquisition, as well as go to market strategy, but also talking about, the mental health of these founders to ensure that they're able to withstand all the stress and all the growth momentum that they have. Jason, I want to ask you just a personal question, because you're a very young individual, but yet you have been able to achieve incredible successes. And what I love about individuals like yourself is there are certain characteristic traits or skills that you've acquired in a very short period of time to achieve that level of success. And obviously you're still, next level, you got a lot of other goals and dreams ahead of you. Jason, if you could maybe dial it down to like one or two or three things, do you believe there was a mentor, there was someone that helped you, destroy those limiting beliefs, or were there certain things in your in your life that you held on to, either whether it's skills or characteristic traits that you believe that you could tie it down to say, hey, this is the reason why I am the way I am, the way I'm able to operate, the way I'm able to operate at such a high level?
Yeah, I think it's definitely a few things. I appreciate what you said. Like it's very, very nice. And I feel very lucky for many reasons. And there's a lot of people that gave me just different breaks over the course of my career. And, certainly in your venture career, it's also good to get lucky early on, is what they say. Because if you can get lucky, then you can stick around. But I think a few things. One, my dad is, like I mentioned, he's an entrepreneur. And I watched him get up and out of the house at like 5 a.m. growing up as a kid. And he would get back at like 4:30 in the afternoon to coach our sports teams. And it's like, if you see a parent, making those sacrifices and having that kind of a work ethic as a child, that will imprint itself into your mind. And, and there was one thing that both of my parents did, which was they treated everybody incredibly well and with respect in the way that they would want to be treated. And, I remember my dad walking the factory floor in the morning and introducing, saying good morning and asking how people were doing. And, my mom being a therapist definitely gave me honestly, she gave me a different skill altogether, which is like, I would say my EQ. And EQ is as important as IQ when it comes to being an investor. And so being able to relate to founders, being able to, read people as humans and like figure out what drives them, what motivates them, why are they going to be successful, I think is another important skill set. So it's like, work hard, treat people super well. And then part of the working hard is like, I think you got to go and be incredibly resourceful about like learning and insights. And it doesn't matter what market you're in, but like we are in an information era. Like I would tell you that, my sister did not study business in undergrad, but she could, if she wanted to, tell you more about a SaaS company's KPIs and the metrics behind what makes a great SaaS company within 5 days if she wanted to, and could probably tell you more than most business school students, because like there's that much information out there. So if you want to go learn something, go figure it out on your own and don't wait to learn about it in class.
Well said, man. Well said. Well said. And I know you just you just consume by doing, just having conversations and talking to so many founders, and as well as just doing so much. Jason, I really appreciate you being on here, and just like I mentioned, just sharing your incredible wisdom at such a young age, but also being able to just share your insights and expertise in this industry, and how it's just the foundation is totally drastically changing where it's going. For those that want to reach out, maybe connect with you, learn a little bit more what you got going on, how do they do that, my man?
Yeah, you guys can find me on Twitter. I'm at Jason R. Shuman. So that's JASON R as in Robert, and then Shuman, SHUMAN. So feel free to find me over there. Tweet at me, whatever you want. Send me a message. If it goes on LinkedIn, it's going to get lost. So that's probably the best way.
Awesome. And guys, those links will be in the description. I'll put Primary Venture Partners down there as well. And then also I'll put his Twitter account so you guys can connect with him, follow with him on that as well. Jason, again, I really appreciate you being on here. Is there any last words of wisdom that you'd like to share with our audience before we let you go?
Yeah, I appreciate it. And if anybody starting a company in New York City or is looking for jobs at startups in New York City, definitely give us a shout at Primary Ventures.
And that is my friend, the general partner at Primary Venture Partners, Jason Shuman. Guys, that is Journey with Christian D. Evans podcast. Until next time, be uncommon if you can.
Yo, this is Christian D. Evans, Journey with Christian D. Evans podcast. We thank you so much for listening to this amazing episode. If you feel and you know that this was valuable to you, please show some love to our amazing guest by liking this, by commenting on this, by making sure that you do a nice 5-star review, and just show some love to our guest. That'd be really awesome. Also, make sure you share this with a friend, a family, a colleague, someone that you believe would bring value to their life right now. And guys, we just want to say thank you again for just being part of our community. If you want to have more resources, don't be afraid. Go to christiandevans.com. You can actually schedule a phone call with me, or you can send me an email at christian.evans@beUncommonIfYouCan.com. That's christian.evans@beUncommonIfYouCan.com. Always love to hear some feedback, and let me know what is the number 1 or 2 things that you are struggling in your business and your life, and we'll make sure we have those conversations. Guys, that is Journey with Christian D. Evans podcast, and until next time, remember, be uncommon if you can. Cheers.